Today we'll be visiting with the best-selling author who as a young man went to college to get a Christian education. But what happened is that he got a girl pregnant and pressured her to have an abortion for which he paid. Yet the Lord took that terrible time in his life and redeemed it into a writing ministry that has helped countless men and women around the world. You'll meet him today on today's The Inside Story, Conversations on the Art and the Heart of Writing.
Welcome to another episode of The Inside Story, exclusively on Liftable.tv. They say everyone has a book in them, but turning that desire into a compelling story can seem overwhelming. That's where The Inside Story comes in. Your host, Walt Larimore, is himself an author of over 40 books. Walt's goal in every episode is to inspire and entertain you by spending quality time with best-selling authors and having conversations about the art and the heart of writing. In this episode, you'll be encouraged and equipped to lean into your own writing dream and pick up some insider tips and tricks of the trade. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready for The Inside Story on Liftable.tv.
Hi everyone, I'm Walt Larimore, and I'm so glad you're joining me in my home library for The Inside Story. On this show, I have the privilege of chatting with some of the best-known Christian authors for two shows. The first show is about their heart as a writer, and the second is about the art and craft of their writing. Our guest today is a respected innovator, dedicated to helping transform lives with God's truth all over the world. In 1988, he founded New Life Treatment Centers, which provided Christian psychiatric and addiction treatment. This fruitful venture led to New Life Ministries, which has a network of 1,000 Christian counselors and therapists who, all around the country, help thousands of people each year. He also hosts the #1 syndicated Christian counseling talk show, New Life Live. Many people in remote locations say it is the only wise counsel available to them. He's appeared on Oprah 3 times, Good Morning America, and ABC World News Tonight. And in addition, he's been featured in GQ, Rolling Stone, USA Today, and the New York Times. Oh, and as an aside, since 1984, he's published 126 books. He's developed or edited 10 specialty and study Bibles and became a New York Times best-selling author with more than 15 million books in print. The Inside Story is happy to welcome, for part 1 of a 2-part interview, Steve Arterburn. Steve, welcome.
Thanks, Walt. Great to be with you, and really respect your work and all that you've done. You're well qualified to get the inside story, and I'll try to fake it as little as possible.
Oh, there you go. I think that critics of Christianity often have a valid criticism when they say that many of our ilk don't reveal our hurts, our foibles, our mistakes, the way where we've deviated and missed the mark, and yet how God has redeemed that and rescued that and given us hope and help. And I admire you so much for sharing that at your beginning, the unexpected pregnancy and how that impacted your life. Tell our viewers a little bit more about that.
Well, first of all, I think any person who is not open about what they've been through, and maybe they have the attitude, all I need is God and my Bible, you're not reading the Bible that you say is all you need, because James 5:16 says we need to confess our sins to one another and pray for each other so that healing can be possible. And I think if I hadn't been open about things like this, I'd be on the back ward of some state mental hospital. But I went to Baylor, and I got involved in a relationship with a wonderful woman. And when she told me she was pregnant, I did whatever was expedient for me and my future and all that. That's all I thought about. And so I arranged for her to have an abortion, paid for it. And about 3 days afterward, when it was all done, we went from getting it done to now what? That's when the reality sank in that I had destroyed the life of my own child. And, even if you're an atheist, there's some kind of intrinsic guilt you're going to experience from something like that. But years later, I went back to Baylor to tell that story, and I got a call from her, and she said, "I heard you told the story," and I said, "Yeah, I didn't let anyone know that it was you. I don't think there's any way they could figure that out." And she says, "Oh, I know, but you ought to be more honest the next time you tell it." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, you didn't just pay for it. You pressured me. I wanted our baby. I wanted to have your baby, but you told me I will not be there for you, and I will not be there for our baby." And that level of cowardice, and to really come to grips with that years later, I had to go through a whole other grieving process and process that through. But that was the person that I was. And for a long time, I felt like God wanted me to prove to him that nobody felt more shame than I did. And I should live in that shame and show him how horrible I thought it was. And fortunately, I was given some good counsel to get out of that, and to see that what God wanted me to do was accept his forgiveness and get through it and get over it and get beyond it and use it to help other people. That's the gift that I've gotten from all this.
Steve, I know you know the forgiveness God gives you. Was it harder to forgive yourself?
Oh, it was so hard. And then I got married later, and we were infertile for 7 years, an infertile couple. And of course, loving Christians that you were talking about would say things like, "Well, do you think that's because you paid for an abortion?" Because that's who people think God is. You make a mistake, you're going to pay for it forever. That Jesus didn't pay for it, you will pay for it forever. And when he says he wipes the slate clean and white as snow, that's not a metaphor, that's truth. And it wasn't until a couple in 1990 got pregnant, both 16, couldn't raise the child. And it was I met this couple on the same day that a woman, after I was speaking, said, "God told me to tell you you're going to have a baby."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, we're an infertile couple." And she said, "I don't care. That's what God told me to tell you." And on Christmas Eve, my daughter Madeline, who is 30 now, was born, and we flew to Atlanta, Georgia. And the nurse didn't place Madeline in the arms of my wife. They placed Madeline in my arms for whatever reason. You wouldn't think that. And it was God giving back to me the very thing that I had destroyed. And that's the God that we have, the God of mercy and grace. He is rich in mercy. And a lot of people, they've been believers a long time, but they don't really understand that. And when you go through something like this, you come to understand it in a very deep and rich way.
I can't even imagine. Well, I can't imagine the way that permeates all of the counseling ministry you have. But I want to rewind, if I can. Where'd your story start? Where were you raised?
I was raised in Ranger, Texas, where, West Texas, possum was the other white meat, those kind of strange things. We were strict Southern Baptists, and my parents wouldn't let us drink Coke out of a can because they were afraid that people would see us drinking something out of a can, think it was beer, and we were drinking beer anyway, so it didn't really matter. But yeah, that's where I came from. It just happens to be the same town that David Green, the founder of Hobby Lobby, was in Ranger same time I was. So, and I heard Jesus Christ Superstar Teddy Neely is from Ranger. So those are the claims to fame.
I heard David say once, "Don't ever ask people where they're from, because if they're from Texas, they'll tell you. And if they're not, you don't want to embarrass them. So, did you have siblings?
Yes. I had two older brothers. One was 3 years older, and one is 6 years older. And I say was, both of my brothers were molested by the pastor there in Ranger at age 5 when they turned 5, both of them. And both of my brothers were gay. My middle brother died from AIDS back in the 80s when it was really virulent and you didn't survive. It was, and some people think that the medication doses that keep people alive were so high back then that maybe even that led to it. But Jerry died, and then my older brother is still alive, and he got married, thought that would fix everything, had 4 kids. When the last one went through college, he left and now lives with another man. And the only difference in our upbringing is they were molested by this guy. And I know that not every gay person's molested, but really the only difference between them and me would be I never had exposure to anything like that. And, when you look at the profiles of them and me, the stereotypical, quote unquote gay profile, I was more that than they were. I was the writer, the artist. I sang. I loved to dance. I performed. All of that kind of stereotype. That was much more in me than it was in them, and yet that I can honestly tell you that's just never. I wish I hadn't had the struggles I had, but that I'm really grateful. I just never had that struggle.
Steve, if you don't mind me asking, how's your relationship with your brother?
Well, my oldest brother is, he lives in Austin, Texas, and we talk on the phone, and we don't see each other a lot. We probably see each other. My mom's still alive. She's 94. We probably see each other once a year, maybe when we're visiting with her, but we talk a lot. It's very, friendly, and there's no agenda with me trying to convince him, that what he's doing is wrong or whatever. It's just so far beyond that. He knows exactly what my theology is. And so we have a very friendly, loving relationship. And I do love him. And my mother is just one amazing human being because she is a very, very strict Southern Baptist, as I said. And just this year, she called me and said, your brother's going to pick me up and we're all going to go have Christmas with, his kids and all. And then I said to him, I've never been to your home. And I understand from pictures and stuff, he has a really beautiful home. And she said, I said to your brother, why don't I just, rather than you drive me back here, why don't I just come and spend the night in your home? I assume you have a second bedroom. And he said yes. And so she's going to do that on Christmas Eve. Now, that just shows you there's someone who, that I've talked with him. It means the world to him that she is going to do that. And I just said to her, I said, Mom, I am so proud of you that you are doing this. And, there's no question that she's endorsing or something like that. She is loving him in a way that has really, it's really impacted him. Oh. And I'm kind of motivated, inspired by her, even as she's 94 years old.
I love that approach, that God sent the Holy Spirit. Jesus said the Holy Spirit is coming to convict the world of sin, unrighteousness, and judgment. Not Walt, not Steve, I'm sending you to love people. And Steve, in your career, you've done that. But I want to stick back to Ranger just for a second. You've written that you stopped reading in the 3rd grade. And so many of the authors that I know and interview, are avid readers when they were young, but you stopped. What happened?
Well, I was a bright student, and my 3rd grade teacher thought I was bright, but I had attention deficit disorder like crazy. And she gave me this big, thick book Pickwick Papers,
Oh, gosh.
and
Third
you
grade?
know, third grade,
Wow.
and I gave it a shot, but I couldn't uh, finish it, and so I got an F. I didn't do the book report or anything, and then years later, uh, Dickens became one of my favorite authors, and I one day stumbled on to Pickwick Papers, and I read it. And so I called my mom and I said, can you get me Miss Mendel's address? And she did. And so I wrote the book report um, and sent it to her with a addressed envelope back to me, stamped and addressed back to me, so that she would grade it and send it back. And she did, and she gave me a C minus, and she said, it's a pretty good book report, but it's very late. I got a C
You
minus.
gotta love teachers like that. So, fast forward now to Baylor, and what did you study in school?
Well, first I went to Texas A&M, and I was a singing cadet at Texas A&M, and I was the only soloist there. And they don't have a music school. People said you ought to go to the music school at Baylor, so I did because everybody was telling me I had this great voice. So I go to Baylor to music school, and then I discover what the word mediocrity means. Compared to these incredible voices, I was kind of pretty good, not stellar. And it was hard for me to practice. And with ADD, I could not learn a foreign language. And so I got a degree in education, minored in music, but that was my study there. But having gone through the abortion and then the recovery and the turnaround from it, all I wanted to do was study counseling and how do I counsel people in a godly way. So after Baylor, I studied at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and then finally got my graduate degree from the University of North Texas. And then I did some doctoral studies at Newburgh Seminary. And then I got an honorary doctorate from the California Graduate School of Theology, which is nice to have because my real love is editing and creating Bibles. And my wife and I, you mentioned 10 Bible projects. My wife and I just finished our 18th Bible project, and that's what I absolutely love to get to be part of.
And 5 kids. What kind of parent have you been?
Well, when my wife that I was married to previously had an affair after 20 years, and then left. And so 3 years later, I married Misty, my wife now. We've been married about 17 years. And so I had Madeline that I brought into the marriage, and who is just one of the most amazing people. I think I was a good parent to her, but she turned out to be exceptional. I raised her. She went to Laguna Beach High School. And I have to believe she was the only female that's ever graduated there who never smoked a joint, touched alcohol. She was a virgin when she graduated. I don't think that's ever happened before or since. But
And she was
anyway,
the Christmas Eve baby that was put in your arms?
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And then Misty had 2 boys, and I am. I think they would tell you I'm more a father to them than their birth father. And I just, I knew that it would be a mistake to go into the marriage saying to them or her, they're going to respect me and all that. I was the benevolent uncle type to them until they knew they could trust me, and I earned their respect. And then Misty and I have had 2 kids. So we have a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, 22, 24, and 30. That's our family.
It's those teenage kids, I think, that, at least for me, taught me to pray. Just pray that.
When you had teenage kids, you needed to pray. But now, with social media and all of the influences and things, you need to pray. You need an exorcist. You need deliverance, everything possible, because it is a different situation. The 7 years between her youngest and Solomon, that 7 years, I just cannot tell you how much the world changed as far as parenting goes because of the influence of social media and secular media.
Now, in the counseling ministry, of course, your personal ministry, how do you equip, how do you enable parents? What approach do you take to encourage them?
Well, first of all, if you aren't authentic and real and they don't know you, um, nothing good is going to happen. The second thing is there are some really great parents that have created some really troubling kids. Not because they weren't great parents, but they didn't know that there had been trauma or exposure to something. Um, so kids aren't robots. There's no formula that you do this and your kids are going to absolutely be wonderful. And that's because we don't control everything. And so many of our school systems are so destructive in their influence on the kids. So first of all, you've got to do your best. But if you think you're going to protect your kids from social media and stuff, you can keep them from having an iPad and a phone and computer, whatever. But the first time they talk to somebody who has all that, they are now on social media. They are exposed to all those values whenever they talk to somebody who has it. And I can't tell you how many kids, their parents protected them in every way possible. And then some child on a bus or something showed them a picture on their phone or something like that. And, all of that protection was over. So you really have to equip the kids to deal with it. But it is very difficult, very tough. You just be sure your kids know, no matter what, you love them, you care for them, and you're coming after them, and whatever they go through, you're going to be there to go through it with them.
That's good advice. I don't think I've interviewed an author or met you and I have a lot of friends who are authors, and I don't think I've met anyone who writes who hasn't weathered difficulties, who hadn't had storms, who hasn't had failures, who hadn't had very dark days. As you look back, you've shared some of those. What would you look back on as your darkest milestone?
Well, certainly the abortion time was the most regrettable thing that I've ever done. I think then when we had a very, very difficult marriage for 20 years, and when she had this affair and divorced me, that had to be the most traumatic thing that I've ever been through. I was just afraid that there would be nothing left. And, fortunately, I had the support of so many people. I was filling in for Rick Warren out at Saddleback. That didn't change. I was an author for Focus on the Family. Dobson, he was supportive. I was on Salem Broadcasting, and I could have been taken off. But the headline from them and everybody else is that there was no scandal. I was part of a tragedy, is the way they put it. So I'm grateful that I got through all that. That was very painful.
I like that geological principle that mountains rise from great turmoil and earthquakes and titanic shifts. And so as you look back at the milestones in your life, what would you say has been the most pleasing, the most satisfying, the brightest milestone for you?
Well, there have been a lot of these times, and one just happened to me. If you pull up the December, while we're doing this interview, December 2021 best-selling Bibles list, in the top 5 best-selling Bibles, 3 of those Bibles are just regular King James or New King James Bibles in large print or giant print. So a lot of people are getting older, and buying large print Bibles. There are two study Bibles on the 5 best-selling Bible list. One is the Life Recovery Bible that I edited with Dave Stute, and the other one is Every Man's Bible that I edited with Dean Merrill. So I have two of the 5 best-selling Bibles, but really I have the top 2 specialty or study Bibles on that list. Now that is just an incredible honor for me, and and so anyway, that's a big, huge highlight. Being given money to start New Life, I was given a couple of $1 million in '88, and we ended up with 32 psychiatric programs around the country. We went to 92 million in revenue, and that's when the people that invested that money in me and New Life sold those things, and that's when we started New Life Ministries. But that was a huge highlight. And then I have to say, Women of Faith, in '96, that started, and that was after a huge failure in '95, where I was touring speakers around the country. There were 3 men that I was touring. We went to 9 cities, and the total attendance in 9 cities added up was less than 1,000 people. We had the biggest ballroom you could get in Chicago, and 35 people were there. It was the most embarrassing thing ever. The next year, I started Women of Faith, and we had 35,000 the first year, 150,000 people the second, and then 300 to 400,000 every year after that, filling arenas with 18,000 women over and over again. So that's just one of the great thrills of my life to have been part of that.
A couple of rapid fire questions, but I will lose my wife, Barb, if I don't ask you. What was Oprah like?
Oprah was wonderful. And, I was on for about 30 seconds the first time. And she said, I said more in 30 seconds than the other people did in the hour. So she had me back, and I was part of a panel thing. And then the third time, it was just me talking about depression. And the fun thing was, I talked about her depression and her eating problem back then, and we ended up in the National Enquirer together. There was an article on the front page about this guest diagnosing the source of Oprah's weight problem. And so I have that framed in my office because very few get to be in the National Enquirer.
There you go. A few quick questions. Your favorite hymn?
Oh, Amazing Grace. No question. It is well with my soul, and Amazing Grace would be close ties there.
Your favorite modern recording artist or band?
Yeah. Well, that's tough because modern, I don't know. I love the Beatles, so it's hard to name somebody since them. I love recording artists like Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, those guys. Yeah.
I remember when one of my teenagers, probably 20 years ago, ran in and said, Dad, did you know Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings? So,
we actually danced live to Paul McCartney playing. We were invited to the Grammys one year, and he was playing on stage, and so we just got in the aisle and danced to say we had danced. But, Of God and Country, that's a great Christian group. I love them. But, yeah, modern stuff, kind of hard to name anybody.
Your favorite Bible verse or life verse?
Ephesians 3:20, that tells you that God is so for you that he will give you more than you could even think to ask him for. That's what I love. I mean, that's pretty amazing verse, Ephesians 3:20.
2 final questions. What's on your bucket list, Steve Arterburn?
I would love to go to Antarctica. That would be a wonderful thing. Other than that, the things that I'm working on now, I want to see them to completion. That's for sure.
And how can folks reach you?
You could, if you want to email me, it's stevesocial@newlife.com, stevesocial@newlife.com, or our website is newlife.com.
Steve, our next interview will dive into writing, how you write, what you've written. I can't wait to spend that time with you, but thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Walt. Appreciate it.
And I want to thank each of you for joining us for this edition of The Inside Story. But before we end today's program, if you have a comment or a suggestion, maybe there's an author that you'd like me to interview, just email me at insidestory@liftable.tv. That's insidestory@liftable.tv. And if you'd like to subscribe to one of my blogs or my newsletter, just sign up at drwalt.com. That's drwalt.com. And until our next visit, remember the words of the psalmist who wrote, "God rewrote the text of my life when I opened the book of my heart to His eyes." May His and your writing be blessed.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Inside Story, hosted by Walt Larimore. If you have comments about the show, or there's an author you'd love to hear from, email Walt at insidestory@liftable.tv.